Mr. Moore awoke amidst a tangle of limbs. Staring at the ceiling, he let out a sigh. It was looking like another sleepless night. He pushed aside an exquisitely proportioned leg and a couple of exquisitely proportioned arms and climbed out of bed. On his way to the door, he stubbed his big toe on the corner of his Baggio Anico armoire. Spouting a stream of curses at the Italian designer furniture, he stumbled into the hall. He glanced back into the bedroom at the two slender feminine shapes still tangled in satin sheets. He had a weakness for supermodels. What were their names again? Ferrari and Porsche? It didn't matter. He hadn't invited them for their names. Still favoring his toe, he hobbled down the gray hall and into the kitchen. His fingers fumbled over the top of a kitchen cabinet until they closed around a small bottle. A little shake and the rattle of pills assured him that tonight would be all right. Groping, he made his way through a maze of sophisticated lines and elegant shadows. On his way through the vast apartment in the dark, he must have bumped into a few $1,000,000 worth of furniture and art before he finally sat down in a Moroso armchair next to a penthouse window. He took in his privileged view of the city, and then his gaze settled on the moon, which was full tonight. Into his palm he tapped out 2, 4, 5, 6 of the pills and swallowed them all. Mr. Moore stared at the moon for a few more minutes, and then a peculiar thought crossed his mind. The moon must get lonely up there every night while everyone is asleep. The thought, absurd though it was, deeply upset him. It raised feelings that he could not control, ugly feelings, random, angry strokes on a canvas. He turned up the bottle and swallowed a whole mouthful. The moon seemed to be glowing more intensely than before. As he watched, the pale light grew brighter still. Rather than a blinding sort of brightness, this was a brooding intensity, like the glow of smelted steel. A moment of vertigo, and he found himself staring not into the moon, but straight into the sun. The sun was casting its light upon the most beautiful scene imaginable. He was standing in a field of short, vividly green grass surrounded by verdant hills that crested and rolled like ocean waves. Above him was the most brilliant blue sky he had ever seen. Clouds provided flourishes of equally brilliant white. He took a deep breath and exhaled. Suddenly Mr. Moore was struck with the feeling that something was wrong. He looked around and took another breath. That was it. It was the smell. Rather, it was the lack of smell. He had never smelled anything so smellless as this beautiful countryside. He hardly felt that he was breathing at all. There was no breeze to tickle the grass or catch his hair. The clouds, so enchanting a moment ago, now hung still and ominous above him. A menacing silence pervaded everything. Now he was afraid. A wave of hope rose in him as he now spotted movement on a hill in the distance. He could just make out the figure of a man slowly moving in his direction. He called out to the man, but no sound came from his lips. Though he screamed at the top of his lungs, all he heard was silence. His steps in the grass were silent as well. This place swallowed up sound like a vacuum. He gave up on his voice. At least his legs worked correctly. He sprinted toward this man, who inexplicably seemed to carry all of his hope of leaving this terrible place. Mr. Moore covered the distance quicker than expected, and was only a few feet away by the time he took a good look at the man. Or was it a man? He stopped mid-stride. All hope left him. Before him stood the ugliest and most disgusting creature he had ever seen. It could have been a man once, but now it was a disfigured mass of flesh spread unevenly over a gnarled, bony frame. One eye peered out from a recess in his forehead, while the other must have been lost behind a bulging tumor where his cheek should have been. His hunched back was the wrong shape for human clothing, and had made a tear down the back of his shirt, through which his bare skin could be seen covered in purple boils. From the location of his mouth issued a stream of saliva and a series of gurgling sounds and groans. The disturbing noises were the first sounds Mr. Moore had heard in this place. The hideous creature took a hobbling step toward him and pitifully extended a blistered hand. Then Mr. Moore's sense of smell kicked in, a foul, festering stench of rotting rot filled the air and burned his eyes and nostrils. He had a throbbing headache. Disoriented, Mr. Moore staggered a few steps backwards. When he looked up again, the creature was kneeling with hands raised like a beggar, but Mr. Moore showed it no pity. It didn't belong here. It was ruining this beautiful place, desecrating this temple. The creature moaned again, as if on its last breath. Mr. Moore could bear it no longer. His hate for this creature overcame his fear, and he kicked it with all of his strength. The blow knocked it on its back, and it gave a defeated little yelp. With some difficulty, it scrambled back to its feet and clambered over the hill. Mr. Moore's relief didn't last long. His feet began to sink into the grass, which was no longer grass, but had melted into a green sludge. Utterly bewildered, he watched as the sun and sky and clouds too began to disintegrate. The sun dripped and seeped into the sky, the blue and yellow running together into a stream of green. The blue and green and white were raining down in globs now, pooling around his feet. He couldn't move, but could only watch as it accumulated, covering his knees, his waist, his shoulders. He was going to drown this way. He took one last breath.